Hi guys, it's Frankie from Frankie Tech. Good to see you guys again, and I'm here today with a comparison you've been waiting for between the Realme X7 Pro and the K30 Ultra. Now this is going to be a big comparison, so we're going to split this up into two parts, and in today's section we're going to cover design, display, performance, battery life, and as you know, I've been calling the K30 Ultra my ultimate value champ of 2020. But in what areas is this Realme X7 Pro a better option than this K30 Ultra? And this version of the phone is the 8128GB, which can be had for 2,500 RMB or around $360 while the K30 Ultra is coming in at 1999 RMB, under $300. So which phone is going to win this epic comparison? Is the K30 Ultra still the ultimate value champ? Let's have a look. Design: 8.5mm versus 9.1, 184 grams versus 213 grams. So quite a big difference in the weights of these phones, but there's one big reason why, and that is because the Realme X7 Pro is using a plastic edge versus the gorgeous cool to the touch aluminum of the K30 Ultra. Now these are both still very well built phones, but there's something about the K30 Ultra build that is just even better. And as you see the camera modules on the back, these glossy backs are beautiful, but I kind of prefer the circular kind of layout of the K30 Ultra over the rectangular layout of the Realme X7 Pro. And looking at the sides, power buttons in the same place, volume rocker on the K30 Ultra, while it's on the other side on the Realme X7 Pro, USB-C speakers and the SIM trays, and of course the pop-up selfie camera and the IR blaster versus none here on the Realme X7 Pro. And the backs, as I mentioned, are gorgeous and they're both glossy, so you will get fingerprints, but I do like both of these backs. I still prefer though this gradient green on the K30 Ultra. It's stunning, although the Realme X7 Pro is using a very nice back as well. And on the fronts, very small bezels on these phones, although just looking closely, you can actually tell the Realme X7 Pros is a little bit smaller than the K30 Ultras there. But on the top, you'll need to settle for a punch hole on the Realme X7 Pro versus no notch, uninterrupted display on the K30 Ultra. The reality is, guys, there are benefits to the plastic build. The Realme X7 Pro is nearly 30 grams lighter, so it will be a little bit less tiring to hold. But that aside, I still would take the anodized aluminum and just premium build of this K30 Ultra over the Realme X7 Pros any day. And there's just something about the finish and the way they've done the frame in this phone that just feels cheap. I don't know what it is, but I don't even get the same feeling from some other plastic edge phones like the Redmi 10X Pro and others. And so pretty resounding victory here in the design department for the K30 Ultra. Display: 6.55 versus 6.67, both E3 AMOLED, 120Hz displays, and these two phones, in my opinion, represent the gold standard where you want to be in 2020 for your display specs. Gorilla Glass 5 on the fronts, but the K30 Ultra is capable of HDR10+. And upon initial verdict, guys, I actually thought I was going to go for the K30 Ultra, and I was certain because of the size, because of the uninterrupted display, it was the hands down better display. But there's one aspect of the Realme X7 Pro's display that surprised me, and that is the viewing angles. They're actually better than the ones on the K30 Ultra. And you can kind of see when you tilt this way, you can start seeing that rainbowing effect happening on the K30 Ultra, while it does not happen on the Realme X7 Pros. And some of you mentioned this is because of some blue light filter on the K30 Ultra. I'm not buying it. And you can still read the text you see there on the X7 Pro, but not on the K30 Ultra. Now, in terms of 120Hz implementation, both phones aren't perfect, but they're pretty dang good. I think the Realme X7 Pro has the edge when you're using settings and you're on the home screen. And for the latest MIUI 12.0.11, I was seeing a bit more stutter than usual on the K30 Ultra. It has since improved, which is a good sign, but overall I'm still getting stutters here and there at 120Hz. And I don't think the K30 Ultra is running at a pure 120Hz all the time. So a bit of a controversial decision here, but despite having the single punch hole here, and despite being a smaller display, I still think that the display quality on the Realme X7 Pro is better. So I'm awarding the display win here to the Realme X7 Pro. And here's YouTube playback on the Realme X7 Pro and the K30 Ultra. And by the way, guys, I just realized I had the Poco X3 box up here. I've switched it in for the K30 Ultra. Wow, wow, that's my bad. Anyways, back to YouTube playback. And both of these phones are going to be great content consumption devices. Yes, a single punch hole here is not as immersive as what we see on the K30 Ultra, but both of these phones have dual speakers, and I think the colors look great on both as well. But as you know, when it comes to content consumption, I always prefer a larger display, and for that reason, I'm going to give the YouTube playback win here to the K30 Ultra. But in DRM Info, we have one wow and a win here for the K30 Ultra, as it has L1 security level for wideband CDM on board this China ROM version of the phone, while the Realme X7 Pro does not. And I really do applaud Xiaomi now for including this on a lot of their China ROM phones. Realme definitely needs to catch up in this regard. And talking about performance, the first time ever, Dimensity 1000 Plus versus Dimensity 1000 Plus here on the channel, with both phones using 8 gigs of DDR4X RAM and 128 gigs of UFS 2.1 storage. And yet for some reason, the Realme X7 Pro is able to attain these really incredible scores, 537,000, which is much closer to the range of scores that Realme advertised, while my K30 Ultra has never crossed the 500,000 mark. This is the highest score I've ever gotten on it. But it's not just specs and benchmarks where performance is better on the Realme X7 Pro. You saw it in my throttling test the other day that the Realme X7 Pro stayed the coolest of the bunch after 6 consecutive Antutu tests, and I think the Realme X7 Pro is actually faster and more fluid than the K30 Ultra in my experience. And despite how much I love MIUI 12, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that this phone is using Realme UI version 1.0, and this software, while a bit bland to be completely honest, it's a bit boring, but it's also a lot lighter of a software skin than MIUI 12, and because of that, I feel this phone displays almost OnePlus-like properties of fluidity that I think is an advantage when you're talking about raw performance. And so despite both of these phones having the same chipset, I give the performance win here to the Realme X7 Pro. And wrapping up the last section of today's video, talking about battery life, the same 4,500 mAh capacity on both of these phones, and in my experience, the K30 Ultra has definitely been a 1.5 to 2 day phone, depending on what you're doing with it, and at 120 Hz, I've been able to get easily 7-8 hours of screen on time on this phone. And the Realme X7 Pro has also had pretty promising battery life, easily lasting me a day and then some, with around 7 hours and 29 minutes of screen on time. But with both of those being the same, it comes down to fast charging capability, and in this case, the Realme X7 Pro takes the win because of its incredible 65-watt super dart charging. I would say this is the one spec that really differentiates this phone from the K30 Ultra. With a 0 to 100% charging time of 35 minutes, it's really what sets this phone apart from the rest of the competition. And so because of that amazing spec and the capacities being very similar in that regard, I give the battery win here to the Realme X7 Pro. And so now just to recap the sections we just covered, in design, the K30 got the win with its more premium build quality, but in display, controversial as it may seem, I still think the Realme X7 Pro got the win. In YouTube playback, I think the uninterrupted display of the K30 Ultra does get the win, and the K30 Ultra gets its third point with DRM Info. But finally, in performance, the Realme X7 Pro strikes back because of the optimizations and the lighter weight software of Realme UI. It gets the win in performance. And finally, in battery life, with all capacities being the same, it came down to fast charging, and the Realme X7 Pro takes the win with its 65-watt super dart charging. And so if I'm not mistaken, guys, after part 1, we have a tie with 3 points apiece for each of these phones. Incredible. And so that's a perfect way to wrap up this video. And so we're gonna have to wait to part 2 to settle which phone truly wins out in this epic Dimensity 1000 Plus comparison between the Realme X7 Pro and the K30 Ultra. Stay tuned. But hit me up in the comments. Which of these phones do you think has the edge after part 1? Hit me up in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. And that's it for this video. If you liked it, give me that thumbs up. And if you love the content of Frankie Tech, subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell icon for future updates. Got very lucky, guys. The drilling stopped for a bit longer today, so a chance to get this video out to you guys. Stay tuned for part 2. It's gonna be fun. And this is where I leave you by saying, this is Frankie Tech signing off. Have a good one.